Hi, this is Ken Adams, and welcome to this special election issue of the Valley View. And joining me today is Kathy Goss, who's a candidate for the House District 20 here in Salem.
Right.
And welcome to the show, Kathy.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Okay. And, you know, I've been asking the candidates that are running for state office about various issues. And one of the ones that I think is very important is education here in the state. And you know, like a lot of kids that are, say, like in college are ending up with a lot of student debt when they come out of college. So, I mean, that's part of it, but also like at the lower levels. And you were administrator in the Silverton district, I believe?
Detroit.
Detroit district.
Right.
And
Detroit
so you have
the
some kind of real experience in that area.
Mm-hmm. I
And
do.
so what is your view about education here in the state of Oregon and what needs to be done at the state level, obviously, because there's still local issues that need to be resolved. But
Absolutely. So I do have a strong background in education. I've taught for several years, probably 12 or 14. I've been a counselor. I've been a central administrator, sometimes for special education with children. And then I finished my education career in Detroit. I was superintendent there. And I had Detroit and Idana and Brighton Bush and Marion Forks. So it was kind of a gathering of smaller areas. Sure.
And I subbed out in sublimity for a while.
Sure.
And we worked, the one that I got kind of hired for the rest of the school year was special needs. Mm. And it always surprised me how many kids were in special needs in a very small community. Mm-hmm. And quite often that's kind of a neglected area when we think about education, but it's very important.
It is important, and I think the federal government has come down with mandates fairly, well, not real recently, but a little while ago, to make sure that those children get a fair chance and get the services they need. Unfortunately, sometimes they're very expensive services just by their nature, and it's hard for districts to cover that. So I do believe that's one thing that can be provided centrally in these smaller areas like Sublimity or the areas I had or Mill City can get this very specific professional help from one spot. Because it's hard. When I was in Detroit, when I had special needs children, there were not people available there
right.
to do it, and I didn't need one full time. I just needed specific skills sometimes for
right.
specific children. So I worked hard on that. And I learned a lot of lessons from Detroit. When I was in Detroit, the timber industry had closed down, the mills had closed down, and everyone likes to consider Detroit when it's beautiful in the summer with the lake and the jet skis and all the activities. In the winter, it's a tough area to be in. So a lot of those families did not come down to be retrained after the mills closed. And the mills in Oregon paid very well. So many of the people in that area maybe went to the 8th grade in school, could get a very high-paying job at the mill, physical labor, but it would allow them to take care of their families. And that has never been replaced. It's a very difficult thing in that area.
And that's probably one of the things that we really need to address as a state. What about these small towns that used to count on like natural resources as a way of generating income and jobs? And so how do you see us transitioning? How do we make the emphasis now on education? And what kind of education do we need to start emphasizing then for jobs that are currently available?
Well, in those areas, the problem is we have very few businesses. We have very few job opportunities for those. Oftentimes, those areas have become drug trade routes and things like that because there aren't industries that have taken over the mills. There aren't large stores and things like that. And they lived strictly on the timber industry. And we have not replaced that. In my own life, I'm a commercial real estate appraiser, so I value things. And one of the things we valued for several years is mill sites, mill buildings that are no longer used. They have no other use. So that has been a problem. But as far as, maybe we should get back to education. I
Okay,
got a
yeah,
little
yeah.
astray and got to my business beliefs early. I feel strongly about education. I think education needs to have local control. And speaking for Common Core, which is the latest standard that comes nationally, I am not for that. And I haven't been for any of the mandated programs that came out federally in the past. And those come down, we had Sim and Cam we worked at for a while. After that, we had Race to the Top, and we had No Child Left Behind. All these were mandated programs. And what's happened to our education system under those programs is that it's gradually gone down. And I think we need to work harder on local control. We need parents to meet with children, to meet with teachers, bring all three of them to the table, and let's talk. Let's work on what parents want taught to their children, not to what someone else somewhere in the country thinks is appropriate. Now, the latest Common Core, they say that's a standard, a new standard. And I disagree. It's a new methodology. A standard to me is for us to say all children should be reading by the 3rd grade. That to me sets a standard. That's not what Common Core does. Common Core is a new methodology.
And what is their emphasis then in this methodology?
Their emphasis is to have children understand, math for instance, how they got the answer. So not only will the answer be graded, but what they put on paper to get to that answer will be scored equally as to the answer.
Oh, okay.
And that to me is not a standard, that's a methodology.
Well, I would imagine then they're trying to understand how well thought out or how they came to that conclusion.
That's what they would like to do.
Okay.
But I read one in the paper today that was on simple addition. And they wanted to take it in one direction that we hadn't before. We'll be back to parents saying, oh, but I don't understand. I can't help my children. We've had that with new math for a lot of years, and we're back to doing it again.
Well, I hate to bring this up, but like when I was taking geometry in high school, they had some sort of special math, and my dad, who was an engineer, couldn't help me with the homework. I was doing better than he was, and he was an engineer.
Well, welcome to Common Core.
Well, this was quite a few years ago.
Right, and we keep coming on with these things, but they aren't helping.
Yeah, but I mean, okay, I guess also I'd like to see where the emphasis should be as far as like our community colleges. And because a lot of times the retraining, you know, you were talking about like mill workers now don't have the mill open. And so community colleges to me seem like a way of bridging that gap of retraining people back into the workforce for maybe a different kind of occupation.
That's possible. That's one of the uses of community colleges. Another one is a major between high school and going on to a 4-year institution. And another is to choose perhaps a vocation and do that after high school. So there's a variety of uses for community colleges. And
I guess, you know, we were talking about jobs, but I mean, to me, that's a kind of a critical part of this because we saw the economy collapse in 2007. And to me, we haven't seen the jobs recover. And this has been kind of a history of recent downturns in the economy where the economy is supposedly recovered, but the jobs haven't come back. And so it's becoming increasingly difficult for us as a society to make sure that people have access to various jobs. And that, to me, is kind of a concern.
Oh, it's a grave concern to me. But I differ from you a little bit. This is the first recession that has taken this length of time to recover. And besides that, it's very spotty. If you go to Portland, you will think recover. Well, they are recovered. They are bustling around. They have the Port of Portland. They export and import. They have all kinds of things that other parts of Oregon don't. Rural Oregon has not recovered. Salem, Oregon has not recovered. So in my day job, I value buildings, and I value a lot of empty buildings. We started on education, but quite frankly, jobs, jobs, and more jobs are the leading issue. And I'm very strong in education. I'm also strong in jobs. I ran the Moe's restaurants up and down the coast. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No, I haven't lived here that long.
Okay, well, most people in Oregon are. It's a very popular and common clam chowder restaurant.
Oh, okay.
So I've run those, so I'm pretty familiar with business. Business has to, our economic environment in Salem has to be vibrant and healthy to get to the schools that you and I both want.
And so what measures can you see as a representative to help create more jobs here in Oregon and maybe better paying jobs here in Oregon? Because I think that's also, sometimes we look at, just the job numbers and not what kind of income people are deriving from those jobs.
We badly need both in Oregon. As I'm out knocking on doors, I hear from people every day. People that have their college graduated students moving back home, and people that are of retirement age deciding they will stay in the market. And all those things affect our economic environment. And I do have some ways that I think would help that. Number one of them is to look at our tax structure. Oregon does not have a particularly welcoming tax structure to business. One of those things is measures 66 and 67 that were passed, I think, 4 years ago now. And we tax businesses on gross revenue, not net revenue. So if you have a very thin markup, such as grocery stores, it's very difficult to make it in Oregon. And it makes an uneven playing field. Those businesses that have a much larger markup have ability to pay those taxes. The others do not.
Yeah, it was kind of, well, you know what that reminds me of is this tax deal that Nike got. Now, speaking of markup, they have a huge markup, and now they're getting a tax break on top of it, which I think is, why? Why do we go after companies that are well off and give them a tax break because they threaten to move out of the state?
Well, you might ask our governor
Yeah,
that,
I know.
quite frankly. He would know why he did it better than I did. But in some sorts of balance, Nike provides an awfully lot of jobs.
True.
And that's what sold it. And I might add, it's in the Portland area.
And, okay. So what are some of the things that you have in particular that you would think that would be most useful for generating jobs here in Oregon?
Okay, to generate jobs, as you know, we are not the only state in this sort of a mess right now. Many others need jobs and companies to come in and employ people as well. So we need to say to ourselves, why are they not coming to Oregon? And Oregon is not competitive any longer. And we're not competitive for a variety of reasons. One is the tax structure. Oregon is one of the few states that still has an inheritance tax, because you will also have a federal one to pay if something should happen. Most states have managed to delete the state inheritance tax because you still have the federal. And then there is also the capital gains tax, which I think of that one often because I own a commercial piece of property out on South Commercial that sits there vacant. I've owned that since I quit teaching years ago. So if I sell that today, I pay about 38% of the gain between what I paid for it and what it's worth to the government.
Well, yeah. But
As a result, people don't sell.
Well, true, but you do need to pay taxes on those gains.
I've already paid taxes on my property. Most of what you're trying to tax me on, quite frankly, is inflation.
Well, that's true.
And you think the government should profit from inflation, but not people?
Well,
I struggled to hold that property for years and years and years.
well, that's true. And I know that, like, when I lived in California, like, my parents bought a house for $18,000, and it's currently estimated at well over $1 million. It's the same house, and it's just older. But that's part of what most people go through in their, and that goes from state to state.
Oregon has one of the largest capital gains tax of any state.
Okay.
And that makes it very difficult.
All right. So, but I mean, so that's one aspect. You're talking about the taxes, but what are we doing right that would help bring more people into the state? And what are the things that we can do positively besides taxes to bring people into the state?
As you well know, companies are about profit, and taxes take away profit. So if you have a company, which we're all trying to find, that will employ, for example, 200 people in manufacturing a widget or whatever, do you think they're moving to Oregon?
Well,
when they have to pay more taxes?
Well,
we have a wonderful quality of life. I don't dispute that. But a company is there. They have to pay their bills. They have to be able to pay all of their costs. Mm-hmm. And it's much harder to do in Oregon than in other states. As a result, we aren't getting new industry. That's why you asked about the governor having to make a deal with Nike.
Yeah, but I mean, see, like, there's other states that, like Texas, for example.
Texas is doing beautifully.
Yeah, but they are also, having problems with making sure that everyone is covered, like with their health coverage. They are not covered, with the expansion of Medicaid, they didn't want to do that. They have also made a bet that that's going to work out for them long term. But the thing is that, like, what I see, not only is the environment here good in Oregon, and that was one of the reasons why I was talking about education, is because I think if we have a well-educated workforce, that would also be something that attracted people to Oregon as far as, having jobs and like that, and having a good infrastructure within the state. And all of that, to me, kind of helps bring people to the realization that Oregon would be a good place to relocate to or to start a business. And so one of the things that also that I wanted to talk about, because it kind of relates to this, is the environment. And one of the situations, we're in a very nice environment here in Oregon, I think. And one of the things, though, that is coming up and confronting us is climate change and energy depletion. And so I was wondering how you looked at those issues.
Well, let me back up just a minute, and then I'll be happy to answer that. What makes you think that we have a good workforce to offer here?
No,
and
I'm saying,
what makes you think that we have schools that are meeting that right now?
No, that's why I was bringing up education, because I was talking about increasing the emphasis on education so that we had a better prepared workforce. I didn't say that we had one. I said
because we do not.
But that's where I was hoping we would kind of go on education, is how do we get to that point where we've got a well-educated workforce that is technically able to handle the problems that are confronting manufacturers and businesses today. And that's why I was bringing it up first.
And one of the reasons I think I went back to jobs, quite frankly, is because we don't have the jobs that are producing the income that produces the schools that you and I would like to have.
And see, sometimes it's the education that needs to help us get to that point, is the way I look at it. Because if you have the workforce that knows things technically and like that, then you will attract businesses, and it helps start up local businesses too, if you have a well-educated workforce.
Right. And do you know that we're not able to employ our own children now that we're sending out of our own universities because we don't have the jobs for them?
Okay. But I mean, that's yeah.
I mean, we're educating our children to go to other states to get a level of jobs that they want. It's not here in Oregon. We can't provide it.
Well, we're going to have to do something about it.
We certainly are. And the reason we don't have it, in my opinion, is because we can't afford it. We have people that can't afford their taxes right now. We have a whole lot of unemployed people that need jobs. And I think where we're differing is I think we need the jobs first. And believe me, I spent half of my life in education. And I do know education, and I certainly respect it. And I respect it very strongly. But it all costs money. And we have to have an economy first that will produce the things we want in our schools. The people that have jobs, do not have jobs and are not employed right now can't pay more taxes for better schools. So my question is, if it doesn't start with jobs, how do you start with schools?
Well, yeah, but I mean, the thing is that if you cut taxes on like capital gains and some of these other things you were talking about, then in the short term, you have less money for those schools.
Very quickly. However, if we do that and we become more competitive by doing that, we will have businesses come and we will have the jobs here.
Well, it's a risk.
Well, so is a risk.
Yeah, well, no, but I mean, there's
your position.
Well, yeah, and the state of Kansas cut their taxes substantially, and now they're having a huge problem with meeting payrolls and making sure that there's enough funds for schools and everything else.
Try the state of Texas, which is doing very well, and Nevada is coming along. Those that went the other way, I feel, have become very successful, and they're beginning to have the opportunity now to gather money with employed citizens paying taxes. See, I'm not for me paying more taxes or you paying more taxes. I'm for more taxpayers, and that comes through business.
Okay. So can we go back to the environment for now?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Okay, so
I have a real respect for that too. Yeah. My family for 4 generations has owned a place on the North Fork of the Santiam. And we had 200 acres of timber at one time. And I needed to cut that to pay the taxes many years ago.
But what I was getting at it is that like this climate issue is becoming larger and larger, and there's less time to deal with it now. Plus, we're also running into a situation with energy depletion. And so we need to, at least from my viewpoint, we need to start transitioning to other forms of energy that then don't exacerbate the climate issue as well. So I was wondering what your view on those issues were.
What are you thinking? Not having an LNG port then is appropriate? Because you think we may need to make this drastic change in energy.
It needs to start, is what I'm saying.
Does it?
Yes. And that is something that
Which form are you suggesting that might produce
renewables.
the kind of, such as wind power and wave
solar.
power and solar?
Yeah.
How much of the energy credits are they making right now? What percentage of energy are they creating at this point?
Roughly in this state, about 5%.
What about the 95%?
Well, see, that's what we need to transition away from, because if you
could
keep
not.
relying on that. Well, look, Germany currently produces 30% of their energy through renewables, and they have a very cloudy country. So they don't get a lot of photovoltaic use, but they still put it up. They still use a lot of it, and they're getting 30%, and they're hoping to get a lot more. And Germany, as an example, that as far as jobs go, they have created an awful lot of good-paying jobs, and they've done that through education as well. But they are transitioning out of carbon fuels. fossil fuels. And that, to me, is something that, I think that Oregon should be going in the direction of.
I think Oregon's spending way too much money on non-fossil fuel now that is not productive for us. I wish I had the amount of money that we're spending on your energy sources for that 5%.
Well, it's a step that we need to take, because
But
otherwise
do we? It's huge.
it's huge. But the thing is that if the climate continues in the direction we're going, it's going to create an environment that is going to be very bad for business. And this is one of the problems that has been looked at many times, and that we have to start making these changes now. And it might hurt the economy in the short term, but if we don't start making those changes, we're going to have a much bigger problem later on.
See, I'm not entirely sure that I agree with that. I mean, I know where you're going. I've heard this, as you have heard my theory as well, over and over again. I've appraised wind farms, and they're very, very, very far from being productive. They're especially.
Okay, so when you run out of fossil fuels, then what are you going to do?
Well, I would certainly like to use liquid natural gas.
That's still a fossil fuel.
Yes, it is, but it's much better than oil. How are you building all of these wind turbines?
You do that through manufacturing processes.
Using fossil fuels.
Right.
Yes.
And one of the things, too, then maybe we should be looking at is maybe having better public transportation, so that we're not wasting so much energy getting one person to work. Right now we use a lot of individual cars.
You are new to Oregon, aren't you?
Well, I live in this world. So
Me
anyway, this show went awfully fast, Kathy. I'm sorry we don't have more time, because I think we're just kind of getting started.
Yes, we are.
And so I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Well, I want to thank you for
Okay.
the opportunity. Obviously, we're from first base and third base, but that's often productive.
Yes, and I think it's important to have the conversations.
Absolutely.
And I tell people that the best education I got was in the student union at college, where people from different points of view were talking and having discussions, and maybe sometimes learning something new. So I want to thank you, Kathy, for coming on.
Thank you.
And this has been a special election edition of the Valley View, and come back next time.